All right. Let's get this out of the way first. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed on Tailboard Talks Firefighter podcast are solely those of the speakers, guests, and host, and do not in any way represent the thoughts or views or opinions of any other employer, partnership, or sponsor. The material and information in this podcast is for general information purposes only. It should be used at the listener's discretion. In the vein of getting right into it, why don't you just introduce yourself quickly, and then I'm going to try to, we kind of talked about how I view this thing in three different chunks before, and some of the main points that I wanted to kind of hit on. So introduce yourself, then I'll try to steer us kind of in the right direction, and why you're here today, like what you're, why you're so interesting to talk to, unfortunately.
Jeff Marusich. I've been on Highland Park for 25 years. I'm a battalion chief now. I actually wasn't at the event. I was out on work injury, so I came back a week after and got tasked with doing the critical incident debrief, and the incident analysis, and really dove into it quite a bit. So a little bit of a benefit that I was able to peel just being there and being affected out of it, Yeah. So just really took it and tried to peel everything apart and see where we laid with everything.
So just give a quick overview what the incident was, kind of what it encompassed, and then we're going to go back to what your department is, staffing-wise, model-wise, personnel-wise, and stuff like that. But let us know what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, we experienced in 2022 a mass shooting event on the 4th of July parade, numerous victims, and traditionally our entire department is involved in the parade, so it just put us in the middle of the mix as well.
So that's one thing, kicking right off, is one of the first things I've written down is that the amount of people in the village and then who work on it was essentially, except for the handful of old guys that took the day off to not be there, your whole department was there or in it or around it or within a mile of it when it happened, right?
Yeah, for the most part. We are fully staffed. We're now at 53, so 17 a shift and a couple admins. So, but traditionally, families are invited. The big plan was to actually have a cookout this year, which was kind of a newer thing. But families would ride on the rigs and stuff in the parade. And last year was the first year I actually ever missed. We've been doing it for years and years and years. And so, yeah, I mean, on duty, off duty, everybody was there for the most part.
So what's the spread of your department? Obviously, in a relatively smaller department, Highland Park isn't that enormous of a suburb population-wise. Is it an influx of new guys, or are the old guys keeping it together, keeping everybody coming back? Because, my department is 140, and it's pretty scattered, and it's pretty tough to get more than 10 guys in a room at the same time. And union meetings are a stretch. If we can get a quorum, we're in good shape. But to have a department of 50-something and have a bulk of them there is something that impressed me right off the bat, and I think kind of sets you guys up for success in this terrible event.
Yeah, I'd say our department is younger. I'm kind of the dinosaur. There's three of us with, 24, 25 plus. But other than that, it's a very young department. And, we just experienced a lot of turnover. So the bonding, the shift it was on is our youngest shift of all. And, the group of guys over there is a pretty tight group. So there were a lot of families and stuff. And like I said, the older guys too, it's been a tradition for us forever of bringing the families and stuff. So, it kind of all, as a department as a whole, I think we're a pretty tight group. And it's easier to keep that when you're only 50, Yeah. Our local is strong. They do a great job. They do activities, picnics and all that stuff, Christmas parties, you name it. Where they're pretty involved.
Man, it's great to hear, man. We just had a pretty significant event the other day, with our department to the south of us, who's about your size. And it was the type of incident where afterwards we had a mini debrief kind of thing, and the chief gave basically a free pass to anybody that wanted to go home. It was like, if you want to go home, go ahead. And one of the things he said was, we've already reached out to people, and we have a person for each of you if anybody wants to go home. We can replace the entire shift right now. Yeah. And I kind of turned to one of the guys. I'm like, how did you guys do that? He was like, yeah, we're just a small department, and we kind of all know each other, and we're all within 10, 15 years of each other, so it just works, Mm-hmm. And it's really something to be envied. So the fact you guys have that is commendable, and I think the youth of the department is another major point I have written down here. So if you'd like to kind of take us through that morning as you understand it and as you got to dissect it, what I want to address, what I want to highlight is the fact that nobody was in nobody was filling the role that they would normally fill that day. Everybody was acting up.
Yeah.
And well up in some cases. So
Yeah.
if you would first give us a brief overview of that morning, the incident, and this is where I'm really excited about this talk. I know I keep cutting you off because transition from fitness to firefighter a few weeks ago, right? I really like post-incident debriefs from a tactical side. I really like tailboard talks. Obviously, I named the show after it. I like getting into kind of the nuts and bolts of what happened, people's perspective of it. That's the most interesting thing to me, not necessarily what they did, but like why was that the choice? I really like dissecting and looking at stuff from a learning perspective. So this is a great. I'm really excited about this one, even though it was a terrible event. So take it from the top. What happened, and kind of fill it out as much as you can.
So, like I said, and you hit a key point, was that nobody was filling their actual roles, right? We had an acting battalion, we had 3 acting lieutenants, and holidays, summertime, there's a vacuum of leadership per se, minus the chief and deputy who are there every day, but the rest of us are all senior, and we tend to take summers off, and there's a little bit overlap here and there, but traditionally the 4th of July is, a lot of acting time, in that spread where guys will act up. So everybody met up at our main firehouse, and, they got together. There's actually, I don't know if you remember in the presentation, there's a great picture of, I'd say there's probably 50 people or so around our antique, and everybody was just, kind of getting ready for a great time, especially because, it was post-COVID and we were finally getting things back to the way we wanted everything to be for such a while, And so the parade started around 10. I believe it was kickoff was at 10. We're always the first to go. One rig had to peel off one ambulance peeled off for a chest pain call. And so they took that. They were at the hospital, but everybody else was in. And parade kicked off, and the shooter started opening up downtown at 10:14. 10:15, we got a call for a penetrating trauma. And the way our dispatch works is pretty generic. It'll say stab, gunshot wound, but it was pretty non-specific. And our battalion queued up on that right away and went as well. But we had no idea the magnitude of the incident. And we were about a block away. We passed the shooter, it was about a block from our last rig of when he started shooting. Everybody just peeled around, did U-turns, and one thing that we found out was we get multiple calls for a penetrating trauma. So it was going out as individual call. And so by the time that everybody showed up and was involved, we were already in the mix of a mass shooting event. And while everybody kind of figured it out pretty quick, it probably changed our response quite a bit. We typically talk about active shooters and making sure with unified command and how, scene safety, right? And our guys just got in there and did what they had to do. And they really, not saying they disregarded safety, because I would say that would not be right to say, but they knew the risks of, once the magnitude of the event got involved, they knew what they were in, and they chose to stay and not back out. There was some communication with the chief between the on-duty shift commander for PD and our chief, and they did establish the shooter was unaccounted for, but he wasn't, obviously not active shooting, and there was enough police presence to suppress if he decided to open up again.
So by the time you guys got turned around and responded to I remember from the schematic it was a corner, right?
Yep.
Was the shooting still happening? Had it already stopped? Like he let out a barrage over the course of a minute or two, right?
Yeah.
And then he bailed.
He was about 80 rounds into the center of downtown. Like it's a cross intersection. He fired about 80 rounds and then just fled off, left the building, and left on foot.
And so he was. It's safe to say that there's probably 3 to 4 minutes before you guys got to that corner that he was already gone, I would guess.
It was about 2 minutes.
2 minutes,
Yeah.
okay. And again, this is, for everybody listening, this is still an active thing. I was just telling Jeff that when I was looking up a little bit of research before, they just set the trial date for December for the shooter. So there's definitely going to be some stuff that can't talk about, won't talk about, or we're going to talk about and cut out once Jeff listens to this thing. So I'm sorry if you're not getting all the... I'm going to ask a lot of questions. They might all make it in. Two parts of that I found exceptionally eye-opening. The first one was he watched you guys pass by. Like,
Yeah.
he actively watched you in the fire department and said, nah, not them, because of a past encounter you guys had with him where he basically said you guys were nice.
Correct. Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Go ahead.
It's kind of mind-blowing, but yes, that kind of proof that you should treat everybody with respect. He, from our knowledge, he chose not to do that, to shoot us, because he respected, we in our dealings with the family, that we treated him pretty respectfully, and the police too, actually.
Okay.
So that was kind of surprising, because typically when you learn about like terrorist behavior, they go after the first responders,
Yeah.
So we were just blessed.
So the second part, more of an operational thing, is that the difficulty of the dispatcher, because for the way I understand it, they're locked into certain codes, right? Like the old dispatcher used to have, it'd be tones go off, speakers open, and the dispatcher says, you're going for this, you're going for a shooting, you're going for a trauma with a fall, you're going for chest pain. Now it kind of takes it out of their hands where they have to code in what the generic or the general category of that injury is. So was it more of the case of you guys hadn't had that many shootings, so you just didn't have that code, or was it just the best he could do while receiving 1,000 calls on this thing?
Yeah, I think I forgot the exact number. Within the first hour, they received over 300 phone calls, 911s.
And it's probably a small group, like 2 people, right? There's not.
Yeah,
it's not
it was 2 on shift. Yeah.
Okay.
It was 2 for the dispatch, and then obviously more came in. But and then the way through trying to do quality improvement through all that stuff, we went from the voice to now the automated, so we shortened that call processing time, right? And all those efforts, they kind of, now you realize, well, the ability to tone out and talk on the radio at the same time, you can't do it, right? So he's pushing out calls for multiple gunshots, and he can't get on the air and notify us of pretty much any of the other,
right.
So yes, it turned into, it was actually, the way it laid out, it actually laid out for the best, in the fact that it got us multiple units on scene real quick, and yet it didn't give us pause to the active shooter, right?
Okay. All right.
And 6 to 1, half dozen other. I think that it played out very well for us, in the fact that by the time we recognized we had more than a couple people, then we were already in the thick of it, like I said, and we were already treating and readying a couple for transport pretty rapidly.
Man, that's a pretty interesting. I never really thought of that. Being that everyone was an actor, and you might have a brand new person in charge of the ambulance that day or whatever role they are. If they're the closest one and they hear active shooter, they might be more apt to stage or to wait and see what the chief wants to do. Yep. I never really thought about that as being a positive, but there's certainly something to that where I don't want to say care would have been delayed, but the response might have been altered to consider that active shooter, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, to at least take pause and say, are they accounted for? Do we have enough for, rescue task force? And when you talk about those things, if you're talking a rescue task force box alarm, you're talking, a long time.
Yeah.
Now, this was open environment. It wasn't, inside, but we were, the police were sweeping buildings looking for victims in the shooter as well. Right. So.
Well, okay. So a bunch of people go to a corner, start figuring out care. Walk us through just a little bit of how medical was set, or I shouldn't say, how the situation was handled with that few number of people on scene, available to transport, that many patients around. Was there a setup of medical? Was it? And you also had the weird demographic or the weird geographical consideration of the hospital being like a quarter mile away, and people running all over the place, right? So take us through that.
Town.
Yeah, so, like after response stuff.
And this is going to be a little bit long-winded of an answer, I think, because you can't explain what we did without explaining our culture, right? And we, since 25 years now, we have always made sure we stayed available for calls in our town, right? So we're at the hospital, we get an EMS run, we paperwork waits, we pick up the next run, and you might have 4 or 5 run reports when you get back to the hospital to finish up, but we always have made sure we're available, right? So quick turnaround, making sure we're always available. And that culture has been ingrained in our department for years and years and years. And that led itself to our ability to rapidly transport, come back, and our units transported the lion's share of victims that day, in a matter of half an hour. We transported 20. I don't want to misquote it, but I believe it was 27 people in 24 minutes. Of that, I believe it was 13 or 14 were transported by our 2 ambulances in town.
Wow.
One ambulance took one red to Luther or to Evanston, and so that put them out of the mix for the whole event. But it's that culture of what we instill of being available, and it was literally package, that quarter-mile trip, drop them off, and right back at it. So our 2 ambulances each made 3 rounds, of going, picking people up and coming back. It's just one of those things. Like I said, if you're used to it, that's what will become expected of you to do. On the second part of that is when we talk about culture, and we run pretty short staffed, or we used to. We've gotten a lot better, but we used to run two-person engine companies, right? And so we really, ever since I started, it's been, you want to be an independent thinker. And while we do teach company, that mentality, that paramilitary style, and following orders, but we also want our company officers, our acting officers, our blue shirts, you name it, to come up with solutions and to be an independent thinker. Like if something's going on, you should be able to speak up, voice your concern, and be like, hey, like, here's another avenue. And so all those guys that were in those acting positions, they were filling multiple roles at any given moment. The first acting lieutenant on scene started triage, started establishing, how many reds and stuff. The battalions did do a triage each corner, like patient collection points. He called those out. And so then they ran into a red that was a really critical patient, and one of the guys doing triage got scooped up, had to take that patient in the ambulance. Yeah. And so then we had someone else fall right into that role, right? So when you're only dealing with 13 to 17 on a shift, you know each other's jobs. Yeah. And the ability to know what is required, the next step, man, it paid off in dividends, because there were so many lives saved because of that.
Yeah, so I have it written down here, and I'm assuming I just grabbed these from your presentation, but on that day there was 12 on duty. 1 lieutenant acting as a battalion chief, so 2 steps up in many cases. 3 acting lieutenants and 8 firefighter paramedics.
Yeah.
Pretty incredible. So you touched on it about the independent thinkers. I also have a quote written down that was in your presentation. I can't remember if you just said it or put it up there, but we should be working to develop a culture of independent thinkers and informal leaders. And it sounds like you said, you're out of necessity, out of drive, out of pure skill and talent. It came through that day, right?
Yeah. I like to read all the leadership books, so I'm a huge fan of that. And a lot of it came from General McChrystal, Team of Teams.
Okay.
And it's about, he talks about being, knowing each other's roles and being independent or interdependent with each other, right? Like being able to communicate with one another, know what the others, bouncing ideas off of each other, know the expectations of others. And for us, like I said, we're a small department, but we operate very independently. We take a lot of pride in the ability to get most of our incidents done, with ourselves. That's not to say we wouldn't go to a box alarm for a fire or, for what happened, obviously. But, right. We take a lot of pride in being able to resolve a lot of issues and lean on ourselves. And So, it just like, again, it just paid off in that mentality that we've always instilled. We're not a very slow lumbering machine. Now, administratively, some would argue
Right.
with us, and me being part of the admin,
Yeah.
but yes, I mean, as far as operations, we take a lot of pride in that, and we're
Yeah.
very efficient, we're very aggressive, and that aggressive mentality paid off that day too, without question, right?
Well, I think it's all. Speaking the necessity side of it too, one of the things you went over in your presentation was because of the landlocked nature of each individual community. And this is kind of like I used to work in Franklin Park, and it was a lot 2 square mile suburbs butted up next to each other.
Yep.
But you guys are in the unique position where you're just north of the city of Chicago. So to get the resources you guys needed was, and correct me, 2 or 3 different dispatch centers who had to relay, play the
Yeah.
phone game,
Yeah,
and get
that's
10
right.
ambulances there. It took 3 different dispatch centers.
Yeah, and the other downside is we don't get any help from Lake Michigan. No one's boating anybody over from the east.
It's an
So
expensive ferry, dude. I looked into it.
yeah,
It's like
right.
$700. Yeah.
Yeah. So everybody's got to come a little bit further. And and again, it being the holiday, I didn't even realize some of the communities. I thought they're like, wow, that took a little bit. Like they're really close, and yet their response time was a little delayed. Well, they have parades,
Yeah.
and they had to jockey themselves around the parade routes, and you just don't anticipate that stuff. And so as when you're doing like if you're a lieutenant and you call that box alarm, you want that help about 5 minutes ago, right? And so now you're like, okay, why is it taking so long? And
Yeah.
but it's things to account for on those days, and those are lessons learned, like planning a little bit ahead. And we just had a fire, and I caught myself trying to think a little bit ahead of the step of, okay, do we need to box it, or are we good? And I asked a few times, are we good? Because learning from that incident on the fourth was you just don't want to be caught being late, because
Yeah.
delays happen. And yeah, we're talking a couple different dispatchers or dispatch centers, and yeah, so
Wow. Um, well, for what it's worth, listening to your presentation down there at the symposium, I was so proud of you guys. And it's not coming from like I work from a bigger department or farther west or anything like that, but the way that you laid out the whole thing and the willingness of everyone and the ability of everyone to get their ass in gear and do stuff, it was so impressive. So,
yeah, thank you.
all
It
things
was
considered, congratulations on your department, because I mean, that's the big leagues, right? Of
Yeah.
course, the routine patient care on ambulance matters. And of course, grandma falling down, you want to give her as much care and compassion as possible. And of course, the cardiac arrest matters. And of course, the house fire matters. But there's also this continuum of tragedies, right? And what you guys went through on the 4th it's about the mountaintop for a lot of
Yeah.
departments, and something not many people will ever be a part of. So to handle it in whatever fashion you guys did and come out with that success, I consider that to be highly impressive. So
Yeah,
congratulations.
thank you, thank you. Well, and there was another department in Texas that went through something, and not with near the same results, right?
Oh man.
And
Yeah.
so those we're already discussing stuff like that before this happened to us.
Yeah.
And it's not that we haven't trained on active shooter stuff. We really have. I mean, it's been a focus. We're developing policies. Our MABUS division has a policy, and so all that it's been constant, and we've been working on that stuff for years, but it's always been inside. And that did throw us for a little bit of a loop.
Yeah.
We would not have expected something downtown. We have a Ravinia Festival, which is huge. 10 to 13,000 on a big concert. And
Yeah.
so we've always tried to prepare for that. But yeah, so it's not that this stuff hasn't been on our mind. But yeah, the crews those days, I mean, that day, they just acted on instinct, and they did just an amazing job as far as I'm concerned, of just, like I said, the treatment was just not, I don't know, the best treatment I've seen, as far as it was just, wound care. But we're a pretty affluent community, and there's some benefits to that too. The bystander aid was second to none. I mean, it was unbelievable. You had a lot of doctors, a lot of medical staff that was at that parade, and that was doing a lot of bleeding control.
Okay.
And that was huge, and
Yeah.
our cops too. The cops were, I know one of the guys, we had a guy, he just left for another career choice, but he counted at least hand in our PD eight. I think it was 8 tourniquets up
Oh
to
man.
cops, right? So everybody's involved in this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when you have that many victims, everybody's involved, and everybody stepped up and did the right thing. There wasn't anybody that was just kind of shucking away from the responsibility.
Right.
Everybody stepped up, and I mean, kudos to everybody.
Yeah. Is there anything else from the initial 15 minutes, half hour, hour afterwards you want to talk about tactically? Because I do want to touch on the response of your station getting taken over by the FBI, all these things that created these weird problems that there's a couple more parts in that point and later that stuck in my brain. Is there anything else from the response though you want to hit on real quick tactically?
For us, we did a very good job, and the few things response-wise that we noticed were, we always talk about unified command. We had unified command, but our ability to push out information was limited, and that, everybody's running to the hospital back and forth, right? Well, that kind of curtailed our ability to pass information along. When we went to a box alarm, and we don't do box alarms too much in Highland Park. I mean, maybe once a year, right? I probably 5 and 25 years for me.
Okay.
So, we're not very well versed in it. And so when you switch over to IFRN, if for the people that know about all that stuff, right? So you switch over to IFRN. Well, we didn't. Our rig stayed on our main channel. And so
Okay.
the Mavis dispatch lost track of our ambulances, So that kind of stuff, our ability to pass information, and we've since corrected it. We've done a couple trainings on it, and we've really tried to instill like, hey, if we go to a box alarm, you're switching over, and
Yeah.
But so that whole ability to pass information was a little bit limited. Awesome job that everybody did. We didn't really switch radio channels. We didn't designate radio channels, that kind of stuff. But on the whole, obviously, I firmly believe we did a great job. But there are lessons learned. There's no question about it. And then we can talk about the debrief part of it too, because I think we learned quite a bit on that whole end of it too.
I do want to talk about that. Yeah. So let's go back, and one of the next main points I remember in your presentation was essentially that government agency came in, took over your department, gave you a very nice gift of high-speed internet very quickly. But also, oh, they did? Sick.
Nothing lasts forever.
You're not paying for that, your government dollars. So take us through that, and then also the conflict, though, of that station being not only the mission control, but also the place where all the press conferences were happening.
Yeah. So we did run into a problem, and this comes up for when you're doing IAPs or incident planning, right? It's good to have a plan ahead of time, and actually, believe it or not, I'm the guy that's in charge of the fire department IAPs. And I was working on it, but obviously injury happened, and but I wouldn't have included this stuff either, because I didn't think about it. But so our PD in their IAP designates our firehouse as the emergency operations center, and I mean, it makes a complete sense when you look at it. There's a huge parking lot to the side of it for the Park District Water Park. There's washrooms, there's a kitchen, like there's, you name it. We have a good sized training room. Minus we don't have high speed internet, right? But I mean, on the whole, it's logistically it's a great place to be. The problem being we didn't know, and so when push comes to shove, the shooting happened. We literally. The guys that had the families on the rigs, they dropped the kids and the wives off, and they just beeline right back, right? So now that station gets locked down. They put Overwatch on the roof. They put people at the door. I mean, they took care of us. There's no question.
Yeah.
But eventually, when it starts becoming the EOC, you have, I think it was 300 plus law enforcement flooding our place. So now it's a logistical nightmare, right?
Yeah.
How to even clean, the bathrooms, toilet paper, you name it. I mean, it becomes a logistical nightmare. I know that part of the PD set up in the apparatus bay. They overtook the fitness center, just kind of pushed some stuff out. I mean, it wasn't set up. Our police are on Starcom. We're not. And so even that, it took a couple phone calls, and on the 4th of July, we got a repeater put in for it. But yeah, it's just, those things that weren't thought through ahead of time. And so now you're dealing with them in the moment, and it becomes a little bit tougher.
Yeah.
And so, and then, not to mention, I mean, like our chief's wife, she became the note taker for the incident commander on the police side, for the unified command and police side. And she stuck with him the entire day, like until like 10 at night.
Yeah.
She was taking notes for him. Now, talk about stepping up as a family member, right? But, everybody pitched in, but yet now you have a massive law enforcement response. You got scared kids. You got, it's difficult in the sense that when you're not prepared to kind of deal with 300, with that influx of people,
Yeah.
and it's your house, and you got, us that we're trying to sort through as a department of what just happened too, right? So
Yeah.
it became a little bit overwhelming.
Overwhelming, I think, is the perfect word to it. Just with our critical incident the other day, we went from the scene to the hospital to one of their stations to do a debrief, right? And then it was necessary. I wanted it to happen for a couple of reasons, but then all I wanted was a minute, man. Like, I want to stay out of service, go back to my station, grab some coffee, because it happened right at 7 o'clock in the morning, and just sit out back for a second before I got my head wrapped around running another 10 calls for the day, right?
Right.
And one of the parts that you highlighted that really kind of bothered me from an empathetic standpoint was the image of these guys returning from the hospital, and there's 100 media people out front, and there's 200 cops in the driveway, and their families are at the station, and welcome back, take a shower, and we'll have a debrief in a little bit, and it's unsettled from the get-go, from the first penetrating trauma tone out, and then you get back to the place where you can have some quiet, and it's an even bigger circus than you've just been dealing with for the past 2 hours, right?
Yeah.
So take us through that, and I think that'll kind of naturally lend into the debrief a little bit. But
yeah. So yeah, and that about sums it up, right? That everybody finally started rolling back. Once they felt everybody that they could get out of the hot zone was out of there, they moved staging all the way back to the firehouse, right? And the law enforcement's already starting to gather there as it is too. Parked everybody over there, and that's where, yes, everybody started trying to clean out the ambulances and stuff, and get everything kind of squared away and back into somewhat of a decent state. They started trying to allocate, I think it was Illinois State Police that started to go with us on every call in case it was the shooter. We had a police escort for the rest of the day. But, as a whole, yeah, I mean, you come back and it is a circus, right? Everything's locked down. Now you have all the city officials, you have the media, you have a massive police presence on numerous agencies, right? You had federal, local, state, everybody was there. And so, yeah, and then you're trying to reel in and just kind of, like you said, and you said it best, just take a minute, like, right? Some guys, they were all able to leave. They hired back instantly. Our chief did a good job of, trying to do what he thought was the best, get a good critical incident team, and he did everything that he was supposed to be doing, and it was making it happen. He asked the union president, and the union president started turning some wheels, and he started getting things moving too. And so everybody's pitching in, trying to get stuff rolling, but there's that time frame in between. And, guys that were on the ambulance are washing out the ambulances. And so, that kind of stuff, it's impactful.
yeah,
And so, yeah. And then, like I said, there's still some family there, right? And so they're trying to deal with that. And, like I said, we were a block away when it started, right? And so it's like, holy cow, that could have been us.
yeah,
So there's that involved too. And so, eventually everybody, did get sent home. We talked a little bit about, and we can touch more on the debrief side of that. Just, you could relieve them. You can say, hey, like, you don't have to go, the good old Blues Brothers line. You don't have to, you can't stay here, but you got to go home, but you can't stay here kind of thing, So, but yes, I mean, some guys didn't really identify of where they wanted to go. They had no idea, right?
Yeah.
A couple of them, they're just like, well, I don't know. I don't want to go home to my condo or my apartment and just kind of be alone. Like that's not
Yeah.
what they're looking for.
Right.
And so sometimes that firehouse is more comforting, you know?
Hmm.
So we dealt with some of that. And then, the families were starting to get out of there and, things became a little bit more organized as far as logistically, the resources were starting to show up, right?
Yeah.
You had the mess canteen starting to show up and feed people. You had, you name it, agencies that you wouldn't even know existed are showing up and lending help. So,
Incredible, man. So how early on did the 100 Club get involved? Was that right off the bat? Because I remember
no,
them being a major player in this thing too, right?
no, no, the 100 Club wasn't right off the bat. They
Okay.
were, I think 3 days later is when they did their critical incident. And man,
Okay.
and that was, we were struggling to get everything done, right? As an administration, they did a great job, but they're just overwhelmed,
Yeah.
right? Trying to do everything for everybody.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, our chief asked our union president if he could help out, and they stepped up huge. They contacted the 100 Club,
Okay.
and that was what an organization. I have nothing but amazing things to say about them. And they came in, I think it was 3 days later. We filled the firehouses with out of town companies. They volunteered to come in, give us coverage for, I think it was 2 or 3 hours or whatever. And the 100 Club came in, brought food in, did the whole bit, therapy dogs, you name it. It did a debrief for the shift that was there for the day and then for the department. So, they kind of kept it to, just the people that were up there on the
Yeah.
scene. And then they, brought everybody in. Because they're two different aspects, right? Like if you were down there, what you saw and what you did is completely different than someone that came in on the recall.
If you're looking for a professional organization, the 100 Club's going to do it right. I don't want to be overly critical of the 2 days before they showed up, but I know it's a time when people were trying to help. The area where the incident happened is a popular area for you guys to go. I've been there several times for stuff because the medical building's there. I can't remember if it was your chief or one of the higher ups wanted to try to help. And again, I'm not trying to be critical of him. I think it's an impossible situation to be in, but he wanted to basically visit the site before being thrust into the site from another call happening there, because you're going to go back there. It's a popular call generator, so let's get it out of the way and just go back there first, right? Can you take us through that? And
and I think he was very well intentioned. It wasn't that there was no lack of care or concern. I mean, the guy, our chief, does really care about us. It was the downtown is we're getting ready to open up, right? And it's to the point where he just doesn't want that, and of course it has to open up on the shift that went through it, right? Of course, why wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And so it ends up, FBI got everything they need, our police got everything they need, so they're getting ready to open up downtown, and he didn't want them to show up and be overwhelmed with reliving it. Even if it wasn't related, it could have been smell of gas, who knows, right? But he didn't want them to be overwhelmed. And so when you tell everybody, hey, everybody's, as a battalion, I know sometimes when I say, hey guys, 9:00, we're doing this, it's not the most popular thing. Now, if you left it as an option of like, hey, sometime today, everyone's going to get it done, but then it's on their own schedule.
Right.
So, he tried to bring crews through, and, I think it wasn't super well received as far as, some guys weren't ready. Some were more than ready, and that is something that I did talk about in the presentation that I gave was, what you think is best might not be the best for every individual, right? Yeah. As a department, it could have been the right move to make, but for individuals, it might not have been. And so those are times where maybe it's just you want to stop and reflect and say, hey, individually, I would like you to go up there, at some point. And if you feel like you're not ready to, that's okay. Let me know, something like that, or just a little bit more open discussion about it. But again, like I said, I get it. I get where he was coming from. But on the flip side, it did create a little animosity as far as, well, you're telling us we have to go through and we don't want to, right?
Sure. I mean, I suppose it's a good time as any to recognize when you need the outside help, right?
Yeah.
When you're at your limit of trying to figure stuff out and it's not working or it's clashing.
Yeah.
It's a great time to look outside but that's tough, like because leaders want to lead, right? So he wants to lead, and maybe his separation from the ground zero during the incident led him to believe that this was a doable thing, or maybe, hey, I did this once when I first started and it wasn't bad. It kind of helped me out a little bit.
Yeah.
You're just stuck in that spot of, like you said, trying to do your best, but man, sometimes it just doesn't pan out, right?
Right. And part of it too is I think we've gotten a lot better at critical incidents, right? And so back in the day, it was you do that CISD debrief, everybody in the room, and
Yep.
you had to be there, and then it switched to it was optional, and then it switched back, and you had to be there. But so now I think we've gotten better at recognizing. I mean, like I think the fire service has an immense way to go on mental health, but we've gotten better at it. We've gotten better at recognizing when things are serious, of when to really step it up. And so I mean, I think as a leader, you try to do what's best for everybody, and like you said, there's a threshold, right? Like that when it becomes too much.
Yeah.
So that's where the Hunter Club came in a really big play. The counseling service is available. The city actually put someone on staff for, I think it was 6 months.
Wow.
Or 3 or 6 months, and it was a counselor on staff.
Wow.
And you can't say that they didn't do what was needed.
Yeah.
And still to this day, resources are available and pretty plentiful for our members. The downside is that sometimes you want to move on, right?
Yeah.
And you want to just kind of push past. I mean, we just thankfully our year anniversary went off without a hitch and stuff.
Right.
But you want to push past and say, hey, it's all good. And in truth, we still need to remind one another, like if things aren't okay, it's okay.
Right.
It's all right to not be okay. And if you're still dealing with things, here's the avenues for help, right? Like there's so many avenues that are out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say that's one of the biggest things, especially acutely after it. I can't remember. I was trying to explain to someone on here, or I can't remember. I talk a lot. But, essentially before you get home the next morning, you've experienced it. You've written a formal report about it in the form of a PCR, at least one of them, and your guys maybe up to 7 of them. You've had to explain what happened in the debrief, maybe. You've talked about it in the station. You've given probably a statement to your chief because this is going to go bigger than you. So you're talking to this. You might talk to a cop. You might talk to an FBI agent. Now you've told the story 8 times before you get home. And sometimes you just don't want to tell the story anymore. And it's not that it's damaging, but you're like, I'm sick of watching this episode on rerun. Like, I get it. I've watched the same episode now 6 times or 8 times.
Not to mention how many people reach out to you on Facebook or on, phone calls, voice. I mean, probably hundreds of people. I know the guys were constantly to the point where they copy paste. I'm okay.
Yeah.
And so you're right. I mean, you can't even get away from it, right? And then you see it on the news, and then I mean, it's a cover story,
right?
So you can't escape it, and it does become difficult. So how to detach is something that I don't have an answer, but yes.
Yeah, it's tough, man. I think that's really where the peers lend into it, because I think, your close circle of peers, your friends, your crew, those are. Ironically, that's the people where you'll talk about the least. Like that's where it's not an issue, because I know what you're thinking because we went through it. So I don't have to ask you how you're feeling. I know you feel terrible because so do I. And so it's like, let's just watch Cops for a little bit and not think about it. Right. So it's one of those strange things, but that by sticking around the people who are most involved with it, you detach a little bit naturally because it's not a talking point. It's just this terrible thing we're going through.
So I'm sure if any of my guys listen to this, they're going to pin me on this. But so I've been trying to do some back work, behind the scenes, and so we have Annette that comes in, Annette Zapp. She's done a great job for health and wellness, but her talk about sleep isn't just BS, right? It's like bringing that in, bringing a nutritionist in, trying to bring yoga in, and and even maybe someone that deals with meditation. So, I can say it's under health and wellness, but we all know there's a backside to it that you're still trying to give avenues for our members to decompress.
Yeah. and sometimes it takes that amount of time, right? And you'll think you'll be treating back pain or low energy,
absolutely, right?
and then you start doing it. You're like, oh, it turns out this is tied to a terrible thing 15 years ago. That why am I crying while I'm doing back squats? What's going on here right now? No, I get it, man, and it's a incredible and organic approach to it. That I'm thankful is more prevalent now and more acceptable now, and guys are willing to do it now. I tell a story kind of frequently on here where we went through something about 12, 13 years ago that was bad stuff, and there was an older guy who was very visibly not okay with it, and there was younger guys who were not okay with it, but also didn't have all the baggage and scars that this older guy did, right?
Yeah.
And he would say, like, hey, I think you should bring someone in and talk to this kid because I think he's really having a tough time. When obviously that kid was not having a tough time, but he was trying to use them as the shoehorn, or pay attention to them, and I'll just sit in the room next to him and kind of listen just in case kind of thing, right?
Just in case,
I don't care if that's what, I'll play along with his game. Yeah, well, let's go. We'll get him in for him. You can sit a room away if you want and listen, because I know you don't need it, right? But I don't care how people get the help. It doesn't matter to me one bit. I'll play your game. Let's figure out how to make you not even happy, just not mad or not sad. Let's get you back to baseline, right? I'm not trying to turn you into the happy guy, but get you the help you need.
Absolutely.
So how's everybody doing? We can start kind of wrapping this up if you'd like. I'll talk to you all day, but a year and some months later, how are we doing? How's everybody doing? What are we looking like?
I think the department's doing well. I do think, there are some things, some effects that I think you could probably attribute to it. This year we've had more discipline than I've seen in a long time. And you could probably say they're unrelated, but yet somehow I would bet you could tie it back.
Yeah.
Which it's still not major critical stuff that happens, right? But, so there's a little bit of that. We've had some turnover, and I think that's probably every department, it seems like. But, I think it might have affected a few things here or there. A few guys might have decided to bail out because of everything. Yeah. And so as the department as a whole, though, I think we're doing very well. Okay. I do think there are some people that are still getting help, which is awesome. But I also think that as far as the camaraderie, the bonding, I think it's going well. I think the department's trying to move back in a normal direction, dealing with the everyday stuff versus, laser focused on that one day. It's I don't want to say it's business as usual, but it's getting back to just normal fire department operations, with a little bit of flicker of salt here and there on other stuff.
Oh yeah. So something just came up in my brain, and I was going to end it there, but so what is it? So when you get new guys in now, you've increased your staffing, you have turnover, you're going to have, just guessing, between 6 and 12 people come through, within the past year or coming up. What is that event to them then? How do you give that to them, or how do you present that to them as something that happened just a year ago, but you're part of this now? Yeah. How does that work?
That's a good question. And I remember we were doing interviews, I think it was maybe 6 or 8 months ago, and so usually the candidates would bring it up, and they'd bring it up about how they were impressed with, how the department operated in that event. And again, to me, I feel like our culture lends itself to the way we did things. So obviously, I'm kind of proud of how we usually conduct ourselves. I don't know how many shifts really bring up the event, though, to be honest with you. Yeah. I know on my shift, it's there. It's a part of our history, right? But so is a jetliner crashing in the 50s off the coast, off of Lake Michigan in our town. Things happened. But, it's part of our history. It's there. I think maybe on the shift that it occurred on, it might be a little bit different narrative. I'm not the chief on that shift, but as far as like my shift, I think that the one thing that maybe does lend itself is there's an expectation to perform. That expectation's always been there, but when you go through an event like that, we just reinforce the expectation of performing under pressure. And so I feel it's my job to try to teach the young kids how to do that. And so that might have taken a little bit more of a front seat now than it had in the past.
Wow. Man, thank you, Jeff. It's great, man. Is there anything else you want to add on to the end? I'm ready to take a nap. That was
No, man, I thanks for the opportunity. I
yeah,
like bragging about us, so I'll take any chance I can because the department as a whole is an amazing department. I'm very proud of them, and I like talking about this stuff, and I hope that maybe if someone gets anything out of it is be an independent thinker, and it doesn't mean cross the line and disobey orders or whatever, but be independent and learn how to operate outside of the box, because nothing that we did that day fit into your usual flow chart of how things work.
yeah.
But if it had, it would have been a lot worse results, I think.
There's a very good chance, and there's one of those weird things, is you just got to be justifiable and explain your actions. As long as your intentions were in the right spot and the actions drove towards that end result that you wanted, I think
Yeah.
a lot of stuff is defensible and
Yeah.
understandable in the context of the event, right? So,
Absolutely.
awesome lesson, man. Awesome lesson. Thank you again, and I'm sure we'll talk again. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Well, I
like it,
appreciate
man.
this.
Like
Thank
I
you.
said, I really like these breakdowns because you learn so much, and if nothing else, you learn so much about the mindset and the approach that you can apply to so many different things. Like you said, just the willingness and the independent thinking and leadership applies to
Absolutely.
anything. So it's hugely
Absolutely.
valuable.
Well, Chris, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, man. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, man.